All right, welcome everyone. We're just give it a second here. I see a lot of people's audio just connecting, so we want to make sure everyone's in the room here before we officially start the meeting. So if we give it 1 second. All right. Well, I want to welcome you to the Meeks Bay Restoration Project virtual public workshop number 2. And we've got a full agenda tonight to bring everyone up to speed on where this project is, and most importantly, to allow some time for dialogue and question and answering. And so before we dive into some of the presentations and some of the questions we have, I want to make sure that everyone's set up properly. So we're going to review a couple things on the slide here. So for all of you, I'm sure many of you are getting very accustomed and probably a little tired of Zoom, but that is the platform we're on right now, and I want to make sure people are comfortable in their setting here. So there's a couple things we're asking you to do. If you'd like, under the buttons on the bottom, and I'll go over this on another slide in a second as well, but we're going to ask that you keep on mute, and that if you want, you can change the name that's showing up so everyone can see who you are. And there's a way to do that if you click on the participants at the bottom. So you can go ahead and do that, and I'll show you again on another page in a second. But I want to make sure that everyone opens the chat box. That's another option down at the bottom of your screen. And I ask that as we go through this meeting, feel free to type in any question that you have at any time into the chat box. We will be saving the chat dialogue and using that to prepare a workshop summary, as well as response to questions that are raised there. So thank you for doing that. We are recording this presentation for others who couldn't make it tonight, and it will be posted onto the project website. So again, just welcome you. And if we can go to the next slide, it's really got the heart of some of the materials here. And this is sort of your Zoom interface. And the important row is at the bottom there, that black bar that says unmute, start video, and participants and such. Really important there, options for unmuting yourself by just clicking on that button. And the chat box is also a critical element. If you can please bring that up on your screen if you want to introduce questions. Those questions will come to myself as the host, and then I will be using those to bring up questions and to share them with some of the other presenters as we go through here. So I really appreciate you using that feature. Also under the participant list, if you click on that, you can see that there's 77 total people that are joining us tonight. If you click on the more next to your name, there's some options for renaming yourself. If you'd like to change your name or identify an organization that you're affiliated with, you're welcome to do that. You can also use the features there to raise your hand if you would like to speak, and a little blue hand will pop up next to your name so that I can see that and identify you as someone who wants to speak when we have question and answer period. So that's another helpful feature. So those are sort of high level Zoom overview. And if we can go on to the next slide. Just to summarize, if you want to speak, please use the raise hand function. Keep yourself on mute. If you're not speaking, that'll help keep the background noise. And if you do speak, feel free to introduce yourself so we know your name. And most importantly, use the chat box frequently. Post questions in there, or any comments that you have, or links to other information. You're welcome to put it in there. The entire project development team will get everything that's entered there, and we'll use it in developing the summary. If you have any problems or technical questions as we're getting going, feel free to text the number that's shown here, 916-882-9112. And Tracy is on call, and she will help you out. So we're going to get into the presentation here in a second. And before we do that, I want to walk you through the agenda real quickly. We're going to talk first about an overview of the restoration project, sort of what this project's intended to do, and how we've gotten to tonight. Ashley from the U.S. Forest Service will present on that. Then we'll turn to an overview of the project alternatives as they've been developed so far. And Adam from Ascent Environmental will be giving that presentation. There will be Q&As after both of those, so we'll have a few minutes to address any questions that come into the chat. We'll take a short break, about 5 minutes. Before we come back, I provide a quick overview of how we're doing small group breakouts, and then we will break into 4 groups, and you've just been randomly assigned to those groups. We're going to roughly have, about 25 people in each one of those groups, and we're going to ask some questions and focus in on those questions and get your input on the alternatives in the restoration project and suggestions for additional work that might be needed. We will summarize, each group will summarize what came out of those discussions before we hear one last slide on what are the next steps on this project. And then with whatever time we have remaining, we will get back to group discussion and questions that you all have raised. So moving on, for those of you who are new to the project, I've already mentioned what's called the project development team. These are the people that are really leading the development of this project, and they're spearheaded by the 3 agencies, which are the lead agencies: the U.S. Forest Service, the Lake Tahoe Basin Management, and I've already mentioned Ashley will be speaking tonight. We also have the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, and Rebecca tonight will also speak on the next steps. Lastly, the Lahontan Regional Water Quality Control Board and Brian Judge is their participant. These 3 agencies are driving the environmental review process. And then there's a team of consultants from Ascent, Design Workshop, and myself, Austin McInerney with the Consensus Building Institute, have been providing facilitation. We also have a stakeholder forum, and I know looking at the participant list that many of the forum members are here tonight, and appreciate you coming. The forum has been meeting periodically and has had 4 meetings to date, and they've been providing feedback and review that have been incorporated into the alternatives that you are going to see tonight. And so those members will be in the breakout groups as well, and they represent a cross-section of interest and property owners on the Meeks Bay area. So with that, let's take a quick look at where we are. So this process started back in the summer, and well, actually it started a couple years ago with project scoping, took a little bit of a break, and now is back in full steam. As I mentioned, we have stakeholder forum that's met 4 times, and this is the 2nd public workshop identified by those sort of yellow goldish stars. We are working towards finalizing the alternatives so that the environmental analysis can begin and be undertaken. And there will be a 3rd public workshop after the environmental analysis is complete and a draft document is available for public review. And the forum will meet during those steps to help refine the process and prepare it for your all collectives review. So still early on in this process, and tonight's input will be very helpful in finalizing the alternatives for the environmental analysis. And so with that as sort of a high level overview, I want to turn it over to Ashley to speak about the project in some more depth. So thank you for being here tonight. And again, please enter your questions into the chat box as you have them.
Hi, everyone. And Austin, can you hear me okay?
Sounds great, Ashley.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we go to the next slide here. And for folks that this is your first public meeting for this project, I encourage you, if you want more general information on the project, to go back and look at the recording from the first public meeting. We're not going to sort of go through every single piece of the proposed action and all of the purpose and need for the project again, because we did that last time. So I just want to make sure if folks are looking for some more general information that you check out that source, and then of course ask questions in the chat. I'm going to go over some of the restoration objectives of this project because there's been a lot of questions that have come up related to what is the need for restoration, what sort of does restoration mean, and why is that essentially the purpose of the project. And so you can see on this slide here that the purpose of this project is to move the Meeks Creek stream channel and the wetland lagoon essentially below the bridge here to a more natural condition. where geomorphic and hydrologic processes support a functioning ecosystem while continuing to support sustainable recreation opportunities. We're going to go into a little bit about what that means here, and we can take a look here just for reference. I'm sorry, can you go back really quickly here to this photo here? You can see in the 1950s, that's an aerial view of what the wetland lagoon looked like before the marina was put in the 1960s in that right picture. Now we can go to the next slide. So one of the major restoration objectives is to restore the creek. And we want to improve the hydrologic function of Meeks Creek, the lagoon area, and the associated floodplain. And the present marina has really created this static physical system which changes and essentially eliminates the dynamic processes that usually occur in creeks and in these wetland systems. And that has affected the ability to sustain a functioning ecosystem. And in the middle of this picture here is a good example. You can sort of see a bank that has been cut off in the creek there. And if we go to the next slide here, we can see an example of some restoration projects. This one is at Cold Creek in High Meadows, where a similar cut bank, you can see there in the left picture there, in addition to other issues, the stream being incised. And what an incision for a stream means is essentially, instead of the land sort of being kind of flat and then having a slight dip where the stream would normally go, and then in the spring or when there's high water, the water can kind of come out onto the floodplain, and that really supports those dynamic ecosystems. And in the example of a channel incision, instead of having this nice flat area here with a small spot where the stream goes through, essentially you get a very deep stream channel, and the water stays in the stream and doesn't flood up onto the floodplain. And you can see in that right picture there how that has been corrected. So the next picture. And so another major restoration objective is to essentially, recreate this wetland and barrier beach system. And we want to address the degraded aquatic and wetland system, and that essentially is going to make this area resilient for habitat changes, including climate change. And in this photo here, which is a little closer aerial view, you can see a better idea of how the lagoon ecosystem creates sort of this backwater during high water periods. There's a much more robust system of shrubs and graminoid grass species, etc. Really a much more dynamic system. Next photo. And barrier beaches are really important ecosystem for Lake Tahoe. You can see at the picture here on the right, I know it's the text is a little bit small, but the green little dots are emergent marshes / lagoon ecosystems. So these are what we're talking about here, where these lagoon ecosystems create these backwaters and these barrier beaches. Essentially, the only places where they really existed in Lake Tahoe were in South Lake area as well as Meeks Bay. There's a few other teeny ones around, but those were really the substantial ones. And essentially Meeks Bay no longer even meets that definition because of the marina there. And if we can restore the natural barrier beach processes and that shoreline wetland vegetation, that would do a few things that are a little bit technical, such as hydraulic residence time, increasing water vegetation contact time, and increasing fine sediment and nutrient removal. Those are sort of some scientific terms for essentially you have better water quality as well as ability to support those species. So next slide, please. So here's an example of a barrier beach. This is Taylor Creek down in South Lake, and you can see the over the different years here. So the first one on the left-hand side there being 1992. And I just kind of picked a random selection that showed this barrier beach process where essentially the mouth of the creek, the location of the entrance to Lake Tahoe is dependent upon the lake water level, the amount of water coming out of the stream, how fast it's coming out, the wave run up, etc. And so you can see how it creates this this mouth that can move back and forth, and that impacts, you know, the beach and what it looks like, and the makeup of the sand and swales in the area behind essentially that barrier beach in the lagoon. Next slide. And so, like I mentioned, one of the things that these restoration activities do is to increase plant diversity. And when the marina was installed, it left the land either high and dry or you know, essentially a shallow lake system. And so then you do not have this species richness of wetland plants. This is just an example. So General Creek is a creek that we consider to be, you know, fairly healthy. And you can see on the right-hand side of that graph there, the different composition and just sheer number of plant species that are in that creek ecosystem. And then you can see Meeks Creek on the left below the highway there is much less. So next slide, please. Water quality, of course, is always an issue here in Lake Tahoe that we care deeply about. The graphs on the right are really just two of the many ways that we measure water quality. These are just examples. There's quite a few other ones in the Swanson hydrologic report that I referenced last time. And these are just, like I said, I just kind of picked two, but you can clearly see how Meeks Creek compared to, for example, Taylor Creek, Tlac, is much lower in the water quality metrics that we use to measure. In addition, there is heavy metal pollution that's been measured in the marina, which is, you know, directly a result of the marina, as well as that stagnant water really creates this environment where anything that gets in there is going to decompose any plant matter, etc. And that changes the composition of that water, adds a lot of tannins and things that actually change the color of the water, which you know, affects the water clarity as well. Next slide, please. Fish passage is an issue at the bridge. That photo on the left there is the bridge over Highway 89. Those are the box culverts that are underneath the bridge, and you can clearly see there, you know, depending upon the level of the creek, that there is a significant difference between the elevation of the culvert and the elevation of the rest of the creek, which creates a barrier for fish passage. And you can see at the picture on the right there, I know there's lots of pretty colors represent the different species of fish, and you can see how above the highway or upstream of the highway, which would be to the left of that far right yellow line, there are none of the blue, purple, and pink species, which are kokanee, tui chub, lahontan, and Paiute sculpin. So there's a number of species, especially the lahontan, which we are actively working to restore here in Lake Tahoe, that can't make it past that barrier. So that would be a big goal for this project as well. And for folks who weren't on the last webinar, the scoping package that went out to the public originally did not include replacement of this Caltrans bridge, but that has since been added to the project. So next slide. Aquatic invasive species are something else that are causing pretty significant issues in the marina area. One of the objectives would be to control and eradicate the current populations of terrestrial and aquatic invasive plant species. Over here on the right-hand side, you can see a photo, and I apologize, with the holidays and everything, I wasn't able to see if there's a more updated map of these different species, but there is at a minimum Eurasian water milfoil in the marina. And then on the bottom left there, that's an excerpt from the TRPA 2015 Aquatic Invasive Species Challenge document. And it set priorities for control and eradication of AIS at Lake Tahoe. And you can see number 1 and 2 there are Tahoe Keys, and then number 3 is Meeks Bay, because of the shallow water heats up, and that provides a ideal environment for both these terrestrial species such as bullfrog and the plant species such as the milfoil. So, next slide. And then we also want to promote sensitive species of importance here at Lake Tahoe. And that TEPCS species stands for Threatened, Endangered, Protected, or Candidate Species. So essentially these rare and sensitive species, one of which is Tahoe yellowcrest, which you can see in the photo at the right. That is a plant species that is endemic to Lake Tahoe. It's only found here. And it is found within a very small elevation range. It's directly tied to the lake levels of Lake Tahoe. So in very high water years, this species sort of struggles because there's not any beach area for it to be able to grow in. And having these lagoon backwater ecosystems really expands the amount of area that this species has to be able to grow and be able to survive these fluctuations in water level. And as well as Lahontan cutthroat trout that I mentioned before, which is a species that the Lake Tahoe were actively working to bring back. So I just wanted to give a little bit more of information about the restoration objectives and sort of the impetus behind this project and some of the problems that this project is looking to address.
Thank you, Ashley, and very timely presentation. And so we have a few minutes here before we turn to the alternatives. And so I have received a couple questions in the chat box. And as a reminder, there's been a fair number of people that have joined during your presentation. If you're just coming on, please open the chat box and feel free to enter any questions you may have so we can get those into the record here and address them when we take breaks for Q&A. And so in the 5 minutes that we have, I want to start with the questions that have been put in the chat box, and then we'll see if anything else has come in. So we do have a question relative to the slide where you showed the floodplain photos, the two side-by-side pictures. And a gentleman asked, which of the two photos are natural, is what he's asking. And so maybe expand on that. And thank you for going back to that slide. It might help to show that a little before that. There you go.
That slide, I think, is the one.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a tricky question. Natural is that's a little bit of a buzzword there. But what I would say is that the photo on the left was a result of a combination of land use activities and basically human influence. If you were to have seen the way that creek functioned before lots of things here in Tahoe came about and influenced, that particular creek, it would look like the photo on the right.
Okay, helpful. Two other questions, and I think you probably, Adam, will start to talk about these in the alternatives, but I'll bring them up. Are there plans to restore the marina, or is it gone forever? And same person asked, will the project address the cars parked on the highway?
So I will leave the first one here for Adam to describe in the alternatives, because we're looking at different ways to address the marina with the alternatives. And then secondly, this project itself does not address the cars on the highway. However, there are ongoing projects such as the Highway 89 Corridor Management Plan, which is a series of management actions, which includes addressing the vehicles on the highway. So the way this project would sort of interface with that would be, for example, the bike path, making sure that interfaces with the plans for any transit and parking changes in the corridor. I would say the most likely outcome of that would be, removal, or the most desirous outcome of the Highway 89 corridor plan would be removal of any highway parking, and then the use of, parking lots at sites, transit, et cetera, for people to access the sites.
Okay. A question about apparently there was an old trash dump in the vicinity, and
Yeah.
question about, is it adding unwanted metals into the creek?
When we have some aerials and we've got a pretty good information about that particular trash dump. What I would say is that most of the stuff that was put in there was more like building materials, not a lot of things that would have some of these source pollutants that we're talking about here. And in addition, the way that they do the testing of that stuff, I believe where they do that testing, I think is pretty indicative that that's not coming from that source, but I would have to check back on that for sure there.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that it's a pretty common thing in any of these areas, even around boat ramps that aren't just a marina, that there is an increase in these pollutants just strictly due to the combustion engines that are used in the boats.
Okay. Well, we've got time for one more question here, and some of these, and I just wanted everyone to know, first of all, if you're having a difficulty finding like how to pose a chat question or raise your hand, if you look on the bottom of your screen, there's a reactions, there's a happy face with a little plus next to it. If you click on that, you'll see the raise hand option, and then chat is under the more button there. And so please take a look at those. And then for the questions that we don't have time for, we are going to come back at the end of the presentations with a little more time. So we'll get to some of the additional questions. And then we will also be preparing a workshop summary that lists all the questions that were raised. And we'll probably make some additions and revisions to the frequently asked questions document that is available on the project website. So with that, there's a couple questions that are really relative to the environmental analysis that I think people are looking to have more detail on. And last question here is, do we know what the impact of the wetland is from the loss of beaver population in and around the project area?
So the beaver population is definitely affecting the Meeks Meadow area and the Meeks Creek upstream of the highway. As far as how that impacts the marina and the creek, downstream, there's not as much impact from that, because of that, essentially that hydrologic constriction there of the bridge, sort of stops any beaver activity. Of course, if a beaver moved into the newly restored lagoon area, that would affect that that area.
Okay. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of questions, I think, relative to environmental analysis, which hasn't been done yet. It hasn't been started. And so one of the questions for our breakout groups are, what are the issues that you want to make sure are analyzed? So these are great comments, and they're definitely appropriate and will help guide the environmental team. So with that, right on time here, I'd like to turn to the presentation on the alternatives. I think that will answer some of the questions folks have. So with that, we can turn it over to Adam, and he'll walk us through the project alternatives.
All right, thanks. And I'm Adam Lewandowski with Ascent Environmental. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the project alternatives. I'll go over the role of these alternatives, talk a little bit about the process we used so far to develop the alternatives, and then go through the various alternatives that are under consideration right now. And so we've developed several different alternatives for the project, and each of these would meet those project objectives that Ashley talked about earlier related to restoring the creek and the lagoon. But we do recognize that by restoring the creek, the existing marina would need to be removed. And we also understand that that marina is an important amenity to boaters in the area. And so removing the marina would or could negatively affect some of those recreation opportunities. So the alternatives that we've come up with consider different ways of achieving the restoration while trying to offset those impacts to recreation. So each of these alternatives would be evaluated through an environmental review process. And as Austin mentioned, that hasn't started yet, but that'll be coming up next in the project development process. And that'll really allow us to understand the different trade-offs between the alternatives or between the different approaches to complete the restoration and offset any impacts to recreation. So this evaluation of alternatives is required by federal and state laws as part of an environmental impact statement and an environmental impact report. And to be evaluated in the environmental review process, these alternatives must achieve the project objectives. So they have to achieve that purpose and need of the project and result in the restoration. And they have to be feasible. They have to be things that we can really do and that can realistically be approved. One of the challenges in developing the alternatives is to allow for the restoration while still accommodating all of the different types of recreation uses that occur on site. And so before I go into the alternatives, I'd like to take a quick poll and get your feedback to get a sense of which activities that you all participate in Meeks Bay. So you should see a little pop-up question, that pop-up window that just came up in your screen. And we'd like you to go through and select any and all of the activities listed there that you participate in at Meeks Bay. So we've got swimming or beach use, camping or staying at the cabins, motorized boat use or sailing, non-motorized boat use like kayaking or stand-up paddleboard use, picnicking, watching wildlife, or anything else. So just take a couple seconds and click any of those activities that you participate in, and then we'll see the results here. We'll give it about 30 more seconds. All right, and make sure that after you click on your answers, you hit the blue submit button at the bottom, and that'll enter your answers. So just another couple seconds and then hit submit, and then we should see the results. Okay, and then, so you should see another pop-up with the results. And it looks like swimming and beach use is the most common activity. 87% of you selected that one, followed by kayaking or paddling, and then watching wildlife, picnicking, and then other motorized boat use and camping or staying at the cabins got the fewest people selected those. So we'll include that information in the project summary as well, but just a good opportunity to kind of get some feedback from you on which activities you use out there or you engage in. So I'm not sure why those red lines are showing up there, but this is the original proposed action that was released in 2018. And so this was really the start of the alternatives development process. It began with the release of this proposed action and then an environmental scoping period where people were invited to provide input on the project and on possible environmental impacts. And this proposed action from 2018 was really an initial proposal for the project or a starting point for the development of these alternatives. It recognized that the marina would need to be removed to allow for the creek restoration, and to compensate for the loss of the marina, the 2018 proposed action included a proposed pier and a boat ramp on the south end of Meeks Bay. It's that area with kind of the yellowish and black dashed line on the very south end. And then it also included a number of other features. So improved pedestrian and vehicle circulation throughout the area, reconstruction of Meeks Bay campground and some of the parking areas, the aquatic invasive species eradication, some interpretive facilities and improvements, and other natural resource enhancement and protection measures. So we received a lot of comments on this initial proposed action. And many of those comments expressed concerns about the boat ramp and the pier that were proposed for the south end of Meeks Bay. And in particular, a lot of commenters were concerned about noise or traffic from introducing boats and boat trailers into that area, as well as potential conflicts with beach use and swimming with the introduction of a pier and a boat ramp in that area. So those comments on the initial proposed action were considered through an iterative process to develop the alternatives. In addition to considering the comments that were submitted during the scoping period, we interviewed stakeholders, including nearby residents, various different organizations and agencies that have some connection to Meeks Bay, and other people that commented on the proposed action. And the goal of these stakeholder interviews were really to better understand the concerns and potential solutions that people came up with. As Austin mentioned earlier, we also established a stakeholder forum, which includes a representative group of stakeholders with different interests in Meeks Bay. And one of the roles of the stakeholder forum was to make sure that all of the relevant issues and concerns were considered in the development of the alternatives. So that stakeholder forum has met 4 times so far during open public meetings to provide input on the alternatives. And if you're interested in that process and you missed some of those meetings, all those video recordings are available on the project website. In addition to the stakeholder input, we also collected input during a previous public workshop in August. And all of this input was considered through this iterative process of developing and refining various different alternative concepts. And essentially the concepts that we have now are an attempt to balance the issues and the considerations that were brought up in public comments, the detailed input from those stakeholder forum meetings, as well as the alternative feasibility. So really wanted to make sure that these alternatives were things that could actually get approved and could happen and could be built out there. And the alternatives also consider whether and the extent to which each of these approaches or alternatives would actually meet the purpose and need of the project and achieve those restoration objectives. So the first alternative I want to talk about is the no action alternative. And this is essentially the status quo. It represents what would happen if the project is not approved. And this no action alternative will be evaluated in the environmental review the same way that all of the other project alternatives, or what we're referring to as action alternatives. So it gets the same treatment, the same level of analysis as any of the other project alternatives. And this map shows the conditions at Meeks Bay today, and which would basically continue under that no action alternative. So you see the 2 green areas are the campgrounds. There are about 76 campsites between the north and south campground. The existing marina is labeled there in the middle. That has a boat ramp, and when the slips are in place, capacity for about 120 boats. The main parking areas are shown in that gray-brown color, and then the day use areas are shown in the orange. And then you see the bike path on the north end and the top of the picture there that comes into Meeks Bay and right now dead ends in Meeks Bay. So with the no action alternative, if this was selected, there would be no restoration. So again, no action, there'd be no restoration. The marina infrastructure would remain in place, and the marina, just like it is today or has been in the past, could be operational, but that's really based on lake level. So just like in the past, the marina would be closed when lake levels are low and it can't be accessed, and then it could be open when lake levels are higher. Under the no action alternative, there would be some stormwater BMPs installed to try to address some of the runoff, but really no other changes to any of the facilities. So that's really the overview of the no action alternative. We also developed 3 action alternatives. And there were several suggestions that came up through this alternative development process that were considered, but ultimately were not carried forward into one of the action alternatives. So first, we took a close look at whether it would be possible to maintain some kind of smaller marina in this area while still maintaining or still restoring Meeks Creek. And we did develop some conceptual plans and took a close look at it. But ultimately, this concept of having a smaller marina alongside the restored lagoon was not carried forward into one of the alternatives. And that's because even a small marina would reduce the effectiveness of the restoration project. It would still have to encroach upon that natural lagoon and affect some of those natural processes that Ashley described earlier. Creating a small marina would also involve a substantial cost to construct and operate and maintain that marina. And at the most, while trying to squeeze a small marina in next to the restored lagoon, we could accommodate maybe 20 to 40 boats. So really it would benefit a small number of people that were able to store their boats in that smaller marina. So after careful consideration, the lead agencies determined that really the cost and the impacts of creating that marina would outweigh the benefits, and it really wouldn't be a realistic, feasible alternative. And so that small marina concept is not included in the alternatives. We also considered an alternative with a boat ramp as a way to continue to provide motorized boat access while allowing the restoration to occur. But this boat ramp concept wasn't carried forward because the existing boat ramp that's associated with the existing marina accesses the lagoon, and it requires ongoing dredging to maintain access, and so it just wouldn't be compatible with the restoration. We looked at the possibility of installing a new boat ramp elsewhere on the project site, elsewhere in the area. But that would introduce additional vehicles and motorized boats into areas that are currently used for beach use and for swimming. And so it could result in some conflicts there. It would also require more space for trailer parking and maneuvering trailers and boats to get to the boat ramp. That provides some challenges, as well as ongoing maintenance and dredging to maintain a functional boat ramp. So that boat ramp concept was also not carried forward into the alternatives. And then finally, we considered an alternative that would include buoys for people to moor their boats out in the lake instead of in the marina. But this is not included in one of the alternatives because the TRPA shoreline plan, which governs things like buoys, prohibits new buoy fields. And also, to be convenient and usable, these buoys would need to be paired with a boat ramp so people could actually get out there and launch their boats on site to get to the buoys. And as I described earlier, the boat ramp's not feasible. And then also these buoys would introduce more motorized boating into areas that are currently used for swimming and paddling. And that could potentially create some conflicts between the motorized boats and the swimmers. So we do realize that some people would like to see a small marina or a boat ramp or buoys included in the action alternative. But after careful consideration, these facilities just aren't feasible or aren't consistent with the purpose and need of the project. So they're not carried forward into the action alternatives. However, as I mentioned earlier, rehabilitation, continued use of the marina is being evaluated as part of that no action alternative. So those are the features that were not carried forward into any of the alternatives, but there were also a number of features that were either included in the original proposed action or that came up through the alternative development process that really made sense to include in all of the different action alternatives. So all three of the action alternatives will include the features that are listed on this, this slide, including restoration of the creek and lagoon, the removal of the remaining marina infrastructure and boat ramp. They all include on-site paddlecraft storage, connected bike path with a path along the highway that connects to the existing dead-end path and conveys people through the project site along the highway, then with a separate spur that comes down and accesses the main part of the site by the day use areas. All of the alternatives also include interpretive trail and other interpretive features around the restored creek, as well as some shoreline stabilization on the north end of Meeks Bay where those rock gabion walls are today. All the alternatives also include reconfigured expanding parking on the north side, the replacement of the highway bridge that Ashley mentioned, there's stormwater best management practices, the aquatic invasive species control, some utility infrastructure relocation, some utility lines that would need to be moved to allow for the restoration, as well as other natural resource protection enhancement measures. So those features are in all of the action alternatives. And I want to focus in a little bit more on alternative one. So that's shown in this map on the screen today, right now. This is a full restoration alternative with a boating pier. So it would include the removal of the marina and the full restoration of the creek and the lagoon that's shown in the center of the slide in that green area. It would also include a new boating pier on the north side of the creek. And this is near where the historic pier used to be years ago. So this pier would allow for boats to access Meeks Bay from elsewhere on the lake, but it wouldn't allow people to come and launch their boats at Meeks Bay. So it would be a way for people to pull up, temporarily tie up to the pier and come in and have a picnic or use the restrooms or whatever, and then go back out to their boat. To reach a navigable water depth, even during low lake conditions, this pier would need to be about 300 feet long. And that's what's shown here on the slide. And it's also proposed to include one boat lift that would be used to store a firefighting boat. And so there is the fire station just along the highway right here next to the project site. And so that would provide access to a firefighting boat near the fire station, and it could improve emergency response capabilities by providing that fireboat on this portion of the lake. This alternative would not change the number of campsites, but it would separate the RV campsites from the tent sites, with the RV sites on the north side near the resort and the tent camping on the south end. And it would reconfigure the campgrounds to provide a little bit more privacy between the sites and to provide better access where possible. This alternative would also reconfigure and expand the day use area near the pier on the north end and on the south side. And on the north end, the very north end, it would remove one of the motel style cabin units that are right on the beach today. And it would replace it with 3 cabins that are a little bit further from the beach. They're labeled as relocated cabins on the map on the screen. And this would just allow for the natural beach area to be expanded a little bit where that cabin is today. This alternative would also include those connected bike paths. You can see here is kind of the brown lines with one bike path paralleling the highway. So people that want to just get from one side to the other can go around the campgrounds. And it would also have another trail that would come through near the day use areas with a trail bridge over the creek and then connecting back up to the highway on the south end. That would include those other features that I mentioned in the previous slide, like the interpretive trail, the paddlecraft storage. So the next alternative, we're calling alternative 2, which would be a full restoration of the creek with a pedestrian pier. So again, the restoration would be very similar to under alternative 1, but instead of a large boating pier, this one would include a smaller pedestrian pier in that same location. So this would be a universally accessible ADA compliant pier, and it would allow people to get out on the lake, but it would not be accessed by motorized boats. So it's really an amenity for people to get out over the lake into, to fish or to swim off of, but it's not a boating amenity or not a motorized boating amenity. This pier, since it wouldn't have to reach a navigable water depth, it could be shorter at around 100 feet compared to about 300 feet for the boating pier. And it could be designed as either a floating pier with pilings in a platform that moves up and down with the water level, or it could be designed as a more traditional pier. And then like alternative 1, this alternative would reconfigure the campgrounds and separate the RV camping from the tent camping, but it wouldn't change the number of campsites. It would also reconfigure and expand the day use areas and include all those other features that are in all of the alternatives, like the bike paths, the paddlecraft storage, and the interpretive features. This is the third alternative. This is a full restoration with no pier. So again, the restoration would be the same as the other alternatives. There would be no pier at all, but this would include a small paddlecraft launch structure on the south end. It's labeled there as the non-motorized boat launch at the very bottom of the map. And this would be an accessible structure that would allow kayak and paddleboard launches, but it wouldn't provide any kind of motorized boat access. This alternative would also reconfigure the campgrounds, and it would expand them in a larger footprint, and would add about 20 campsites, 10 on the north and 10 on the south side of the creek in that larger campground footprint. It would also reconfigure the parking on the south side. So you can see they would add a drop-off area and handicap parking near the day use area where the parking currently is. And then it would shift the main parking closer to the highway on the west side of the site. And the goal there really is to provide closer access from the campground and the day use area to the beach, and to get the cars further away from the beach, and also provide a little bit of a buffer between the campground and the highway. So you'd have that parking lot so the campsites aren't right up against the highway. And then like alternatives 1 and 2, this would include many of those other same features, the reconfigured and expanded day use areas, the connected bike paths, and the interpretive features. So I'd mentioned the non-motorized boat launch that's proposed in that alternative 3. And these are just some representative feature or photos to give you a sense of what those might look like. The exact design has not been determined, but it would be a small structure that would provide an accessible launching opportunity for paddlecraft. And of course, people could still launch their kayaks or their stand-up paddle boards from anywhere on the beach. They wouldn't have to go here, but it would just provide that amenity for people that have accessibility challenges, or they would prefer to launch their craft from a facility like this. I'd also mentioned the paddlecraft storage. That's included in all 3 of the action alternatives. And again, these are just some representative photos to give you a sense of what we're talking about. The final design hasn't been settled on, but it would be a place where private individuals could lock up and store their kayaks or their stand-up paddle boards on site. And it's intended to make it more convenient for paddlers by leaving their equipment on site, and it may allow some people to walk, bike, or take transit to the site because they wouldn't need to carry their paddleboard or kayak every time. So one thing that's important to note is that we've combined the various pier and upland features into a set of alternatives that can be evaluated through the environmental review process. But those elements of the alternatives can be mixed and matched after the environmental review to create a final modified version of any one of these alternatives. So if you like the upland features in one alternative, but the pier or the lack of pier in another alternative, those aren't necessarily tied together. So for example, we could combine the upland facilities from alternative 3 with the pier for alternative 1. So there is that ability to mix and match. And with that in mind, I want to take another quick poll question to get a sense of which upland feature is most important to you. So you see again the pop-up window here with the poll questions, and if you could just select the one upland feature that's the highest priority that you think should be the highest priority element to address. So putting aside the piers and the lakeside things, do you think the most important upland feature to address would be the campgrounds, the paddlecraft storage, the improved bike path connectivity, the expanded and reconfigured parking, the other accessibility improvements, the interpretive or educational features, or some other upland facility? Or do you think the upland facilities should just stay the way they are today and should not be changed? Then there's an option for that at the bottom. So take about 30 seconds or so. Pick the one that makes the most sense or is the highest priority to you. And then remember to hit that blue submit button at the bottom. So we'll give everyone just another few seconds to read through those and pick which one is the most important. You may have a couple that you think are really important, but for this exercise, just try to pick your number one priority. Okay, we'll just give it about another 15 or 20 seconds. So go ahead and click on that feature that's a priority, and then remember to hit the submit button when you're done. Okay, let's close out the poll question and see the results. All right, so it looks like the improved bike path connectivity through Meeks Bay is the highest priority for the most people. 38% of you selected that one. And then that was followed by the expanded or reconfigured parking. And then the paddlecraft storage and the campgrounds came in behind that. So thanks everyone for that. And then before we wrap this up, I have one more poll question for you. And so I know many of you are just hearing about these alternatives for the first time now, and you haven't had a whole lot of time to think through them, but just based on what you know so far, what's your favorite alternative? And it's okay if you don't know. If you need more information, you can click that first option. You don't know, need more information. Or if you like alternative 1, select that. Again, that's the restoration with that larger boating pier that would provide the motorized boat access to Meeks Bay. Or maybe you liked alternative 2. That's again the full restoration with that pedestrian pier. So again, no motorized boat access, but a pier that people could use for swimming or just getting out in the lake. Or maybe you like alternative 3 that had the expanded campgrounds and the upland improvements and no pier. Or maybe some of you like the no action alternative, and that's a viable choice too. That's the last one there. If you don't want to see the restoration or the change to the marina and the creek, select that one. So we'll give you, a few minutes to pick your favorite alternative. Again, this is not binding. You can change your mind later. I just want to get a quick pulse on, based on what you know so far, does one of these kind of rise to the top? Again, remember to hit the blue submit button when you're done, and we'll give it just another 15 or 20 seconds, and then we'll wrap that up and see the results.
So Adam, while people are finishing their selections there, if when you wrap up, if you could speak to a couple items here, I'll just prep you with it because we're running a little behind, and love for you to address some of the issues that have been raised. And those questions really are, why are there only 3 alternative choices? And then if you could expand a little bit around the boat pier, would that include a gas dock for refueling? Or is that being considered as part of the pier element?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so maybe I'll take that one first. So the fueling station is not being considered as part of that pier. And in fact, new fueling stations are prohibited on piers. They've got to be within a marina. So that's not an option here. Now we have heard some suggestions about things like electric charging stations for electric boats. And that's something that that could be considered. But no fuel pumps or fueling stations. And then in terms of the number of alternatives, that's something that we had all kind of struggled with as well. There are an infinite number of ways that you can combine these different features, but we needed to pick a reasonable number that could be evaluated and that addresses most of those feasible options. And so we came up with these 3 action alternatives plus the no action. Do understand that there are people out there that would like to see other variations. Some of those concepts that I talked about earlier that were considered but not carried forward in the alternatives. But we tried to really be diligent in making sure that everything that we considered those and assessed whether they were feasible. And so the alternatives you see really present everything that that we thought was feasible that came up through this process. So they're all realistic alternatives that could move forward. And I see the polling results have just popped up. And so it looks like 43% of people liked alternative 3. That's the option without the pier. That was followed by alternative 2, the pedestrian pier, then followed by alternative 1 with the boating pier, and then the no action alternative. So thanks to everybody for providing that input. And then we'll move on to Q&A. I think that's the end of my presentation.
Yeah, and so we're running a couple minutes behind here, but you started to address a couple of the questions, and I suggest we look at maybe 2 more of the questions, and then we take a quick 5-minute break before we come back and then go into breakout groups where we will explore more of these questions. And for those of you who have posted questions, thank you. Know that I have them all in the chat, and we will definitely be getting to all of the questions. If not tonight in the time that we have allotted, then definitely the project development team will be digging into those. And so Adam's aware the screen is black that people are seeing right now. Not sure if your presentations got held up there, so might take a look at that and see if you can bring it back up. Fortunately, the screen that you would be looking at just says that we're in Q&A. So let's address another question and go from there. Some questions around what is day use and what is included in day use versus sort of beach activities. Any clarity you can provide there?
Yeah, so I mean, day use is basically the picnic tables, restrooms, kind of similar to the facilities that are out there. So it is closely related to beach use. There's nothing specific and new plan for that. It's really just kind of the picnic areas for the most part that are off the beach. Mm-hmm. I don't know, Ashley may have other points she wants to bring up on that, but it's generally the picnic areas.
I think just the main difference being that the beach activities there are really kind of mostly on the beach, not swimming and those kinds of things. And then the day use areas are picnic sites. There could be, opportunities for something like a volleyball court, those kinds of things. Okay.
So a number of questions coming in around public safety access for boats. And specifically, if there's been any discussion amongst the project development team about emergency boat, water taxi access, as opposed to just general public access. We'll keep an eye on that. So back to the question at hand. Can you elaborate a little bit about the
I can do that, Austin. Yeah, we've had quite a few discussions with the Meeks Bay Fire District and North Lake Tahoe Fire Protection District. And what we have done with the alternatives here is sort of presented a range of ways that the, public emergency, access could be provided. And on the alternative with the pier that provides motorized access, on that pier, we would be looking to provide like a lift that for a boat that could be stored on the pier. So that alternative provides essentially storage and access for an emergency boat. Under the other alternatives, there would be less access in Meeks Bay for those types of boats. The pedestrian pier, if the water level was high enough, there would still be an opportunity for an emergency boat to come up, next to that pier and moor on it and use that to get someone off. And then under the third alternative, it would be essentially like it is out there right now, where a boat could always drive up onto the beach if necessary, but we would not be providing additional emergency services access under that alternative.
Okay, well, I want to move on here because we are running about 8 minutes behind schedule here, and we need to save some time for the breakout groups where we can get into a little bit more depth. And so again, everyone, thank you for all the questions that are coming in the chat box. We've got them all. We're going to be responding to those as a project team. And so right now, I'd like us all just to take a 5-minute break to get up and move around and get a glass of water, and then come back and I'll orient you to how we're going to do the breakout sessions. And then we'll break into 4 smaller groups and have some continued dialogue. So I have 6:38 on my clock here. If you could all just take a couple minutes and get up and move around, get the blood flowing, and be back at 6:44. And 6:44, and we'll resume and get going with the breakout. So thank you. Quick break. All right, folks, coming back to the table here. I'd like to get going. We are crunched for time. So welcome back from a short stretch break. And if I could get the next slide to come up. Okay, so what we're going to do here before we go into breakouts, turns out we have a special guest with us, Ed Miller, who's the president of the board of directors from the Meeks Bay Fire Department. And he's just going to share very briefly some thoughts and explain a little bit more on emergency access issues in the Bay. I think that'll address some of the questions individuals have. And so, Ed, if you could turn to that real quickly, and then we'll jump to breakout groups.
Yeah, thank you so much for accommodating my truncated schedule, and greetings to all of you participating, and thank you for having interest in this project. Those of us at Meeks Bay Fire and North Tahoe Fire are, of course, interested in the first alternative. We find the need for a fire rescue vessel to be quite important to us and the people that we take care of in our district. The North Tahoe and Meeks Bay are the only fire districts around the lake that do not have any type of watercraft. We cover 36 miles of shoreline, which is a considerable amount of shoreline of the lake. And one of or several of the rationales for our desire to have this rescue vehicle or vessel, for one thing, there are a lot of lakefront properties, not only in the Meeks Bay district, but also all along the North Shore. Down here in our area, the driveways from Highway 89 to the structures, which would be close to the lakeside, can be very long, and a good deal of them do not plow snow in the wintertime. So there is no access on the land route, and the only access to these properties is from the lakeside. So having a fire rescue vessel, which would have a high capacity pump that could pump water right out of the lake and supply suppression personnel, would be most valuable. The other districts' jurisdictions are far away, Placer County and the Coast Guard are up on the North Shore. The other boats are on the East and South Shore. California State Parks no longer operates their boat. And we have Sugar Pine Point State Park, DL Bliss State Park, and Emerald Bay State Park that are adjoining to our land districts. So that's a lot of land to cover. Also, there are a number of private homeowners beaches and private property beaches along the way as well. We had an incident, just to give you an example, the fireworks barge that was shooting fireworks off Tahoe City a couple of years ago. Please try not to laugh. It caught fire. And our personnel that were on that boat, on the barge, needed a way to get off. And having a vessel of our own would make a big difference. There's been a mention of why don't we use a hovercraft? That would, for some reason, I don't know why that was brought up, but just to answer that question, Truckee uses a hovercraft. That was what was asked about. And Truckee has a lake that freezes, and then it has reservoirs that freeze. So a hovercraft is more appropriate for that than a waterborne vessel. The other reason is that TRPA has decibel levels that are approved or not approved close to shore, and a hovercraft makes about as much noise as a helicopter. So that was one aspect of that as well. The final issue is taxes. I know that we were asked a question about would taxes go up in order to purchase a fire rescue vessel? And the answer to that is no. Taxes are not raised for the purchase of any specific apparatus or vehicles. We buy engines, pumpers, trucks, pickups, sedans all the time, and are not raising taxes for those. The only way a tax can be raised is by a special tax or by a benefit assessment. And those are only done after an election of either the property owners, in the case of a benefit assessment, or a special tax, which registered voters vote on. So there wouldn't be any additional tax added to residents' current tax in order to purchase a fire vehicle or vessel. And the final thing is just to remind you that we have had numerous incidents on the water right off Homewood, losing a young man from UNR on a paddleboard, and there have been others. Usually there's sometimes one a year. The faster we can get out there, the better off we are, and that's not only for fire, but for rescue and any other type of emergency that needs a response. And that's pretty much my presentation, and if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them either now or in the future.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Ed. And we're going to go into the breakouts. We've captured a couple questions, and I know this is an ongoing dialogue, so we can follow up with you afterwards. But I want to respect everyone's time tonight, and we are running behind. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. So if I can turn everyone's attention, and I apologize, we are about 20 minutes into where we should have been, but that's what happens with the dialogue, and there's a lot of questions being raised. So we're going to shorten these breakout groups by 5 minutes, and I ask that you participate in these very succinctly. And there's a number of the stakeholder forums members here tonight. And folks will join in the breakouts, but if I could ask the forum members to let the members of the public raise questions first, in respect for the folks that haven't been as engaged as the forum members, that might help move things along here a little bit. So we're going to focus in these breakout groups on 2 questions. Do you have questions on the project alternatives or the need for the restoration? And secondly, given the need to evaluate a range of alternatives, did we miss anything, or is there something else you would like to see evaluated? Each group will have a facilitator and a note taker from the project development team, and we're really focusing on those questions, and then the note takers will report out so that you all can hear what the other groups brought up. And there's 4 groups, so people are just randomly put into it. We have about 75 people, so almost 20 people in each group, and so we don't have a lot of time. So we're just going to go around the room and call on each person, and if they want to chime in and ask something, please do. You can also drop in questions in the chat box in your breakout group, and those will be saved. And we have a lot of questions coming in There's going to be some work after this workshop, obviously, to get responses to you. So we will speak about that at the end of the meeting as well. So with that, each group will be given a 5-minute warning towards the end there. And so the facilitator may ask to sort of wrap up so that they can get their notes together and come back and report. So with that, it'll take us a second as the computer shuffles people around, and then you should end up in one of these 4 breakout groups. So with that, we'll get going and we'll see you in 20 minutes. Thank you for taking the truncated time. We're going to try to wrap up here in 15 minutes to keep you all moving on with your evening. And I apologize that there wasn't enough time, but we've sort of run over. And so what I'd like to hear from each group is a quick summary of the key points that you've come out. And if you can keep this to a few minutes, that would be most appreciated. And maybe we can start with group 4. If I could get them to chime in here, and probably wondering what group that is. Group 4 was Victoria and Ashley.
Okay. I was thinking that that was us, but thank you for that. And Austin, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Okay, great. So some questions that came up for our group, there was just some curiosity about what the opposition to the project is, whether or not cost analysis is going to be included in the project analysis. And then there were some questions related to the emergency access and pier, related to, are there other places where the fire district could use a pier or a marina on the West Shore? How often would the fireboat be used? Interest on the statistics. What are the, how would that be staffed? Would there be additional staff, or would the existing staff be out on the boat and then not available to do other emergencies on the West Shore? Some questions about the trailhead parking at across the highway, if that could be added to the project area. Some timeline questions, comparison of parking spaces, and then just some more questions about why a marina would not be considered a viable option. Questions about whether or not the north and south campgrounds would be under single management after that. And I think that was most of the questions that we had.
Yeah. Okay. Well, in essence of time, we'll move on to group 3, which was Tiffany as the facilitator and Rebecca as note taker.
Okay, I'll report out. So our conversation really did revolve around the fireboat kind of issue. And one alternative, that some felt was not considered was there another way to provide that fire access and fireboat access without the need for a 300-foot long pier? So that was one comment. And then also, just looking at, the rationale behind not including the smaller marina that would provide more of a safe harbor for the fireboat. And then, just a lot of questions around, the need for the fireboat. So I think that's something we'll need to address in a lot of detail when we get into the environmental as well. And then also another thing that we maybe didn't address or that we could address would be, well, looking at moving all of the beach cabins. So not just the one cabin, but maybe all of the structures that are along the shoreline in that north area as they're impacting the beach there. And then we had a suggestion to allow the participants to try a different kind of poll where they could actually pick some of those upland features and pick which ones that they'd like to move where and some of the different configurations. So something a little more interactive to participate in for that design on the upland.
Okay. Thank you, Rebecca. Can we move on to group 2 with Adam as a facilitator and Brian, note taker?
Yeah, I'm Brian. Yeah, group 2, we didn't have any real themes, but we had an awful lot of variety. So sort of one of the first things was there were some feelings that we should be looking at some more sort of smaller buoy type structures similar to the Emerald Bay buoy field. And we know that there are limitations on buoys in Lake Tahoe, but we felt that there needs to be some sort of mitigations for loss of motorized boating access. And part of that, you need to look at it as boating is also an alternative type of transportation. Let's see. There's some other questions that were just answered that were general. What happened to the original 28 proposal, and that thing is now been modified and is no longer being considered. The ADA ramp near the center of the bay, some felt like that is a really busy section of the beach, and that's not a good spot to create more congestion. Felt like any other sort of pedestrian access should be closer to the marina mouth, even though there are limitations to putting piers near creek mouths. There were some questions about Washoe tribe involvement, and that was answered yes, and they're promoting a less intense alternative. Security was an issue. The fireboat thought there should be a deeper conversation about the fireboat issue, and security in general in this section of the lake is lacking police and things like that. One thing that was new was we really didn't discuss the gabions, and that was brought up. The gabions on the north end of the bay is something needs restoration. That is part of the project actually, and it's more restoration in Alt 1 than Alt 2 and 3 because there's the cabins being moved in Alt 1 and not Alt 2 and 3. But I think maybe there was a feeling that all the cabins should be moved out of the shore zone to do a proper shoreline restoration. One thing I have not heard before, which is new, is we should consider as part of the interpretive features a stream profile chamber in the stream similar to Taylor Creek. So you can see the fish spawning and doing what fish do. Let's see. And I think that, the one more, yeah, could we have moved the marina to the north? Did we consider moving it way to the north of the bay? And I know we did talk about boat ramps that far north, and some of the engineers types felt like the topography didn't work for a boat ramp, let alone digging a new marina in the north section of the bay. And if anyone, did I miss anything?
Good, thanks, Brian. Well, I'm going to go on to group one, and that was my group. And unfortunately, our reporter was having some technical problems accessing it. So I played well, it looks like she just texted me and says she can respond. So Shannon, why don't you report out and I can augment if I have anything else to add.
Sure, and I may have missed some stuff because it was cutting out on me. But what we heard a lot of was, well, there was a lot of discussion about the emergency fireboat as well. And one of the questions raised that I haven't heard was just what other locations in the general vicinity, kind of the West Shore, have been looked at as an alternative to Meeks Bay. And then there was discussion about liking the relocating of those cabins, and maybe that could be an element that was included in all three alternatives. A lot of people liked the option of being able to store the kayaks there, and that could be, you know, something included in all the alternatives as well. Let's see what else.
I can add in.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, maybe if you could add in a little, Austin. I think my notes are pretty slim because of being cut out so often.
We're having problems there. So a couple other things that came up. Folks would like to see the bike path evaluated, the path especially that goes right through the middle of the campground in alternative 3, and what are the potential safety issues there and just congestion with people riding through a busy area. Also, if in the restoration process, what would happen with some of the current facilities or metal and some of the concrete that's in the spot that's the old marina? How would that be taken out, or would it be taken out? So some clarity there. And then a big question around the day storage or the storage used for paddle crafts, how would that be managed? You know, and what's the operating procedures that would manage? And then lastly, just really around parking and the importance of day use parking, and ideally getting the day use parking as close to the beach as possible to allow people to transfer goods out of their cars and into the beach. That's an important aspect. And then lastly, if a pier was to be included, sort of how would it be managed, and to ensure that, you know, it doesn't become a safety issue, or you have too many boats trying to dock up against it and whatnot. So some clarity in how the features that are proposed would actually be utilized and managed came across pretty clearly. So with that, that's our 4 groups. And again, I apologize that we got cut short there. I know we had to take a little time away because we went over in some of the presentations, but I do want to assure everyone, as Tracy's just put in the chat, there's an email address that you can write to if you have questions. And we want to make sure that all the questions that we have in our chat box, we will be working on updating a frequently asked questions document. And I encourage folks to check out the project website, which is also in the chat box. And there's really 2 sites here. And so one is the Meeks Bay project, and there's a bunch of information there and links to historical documents. And you have to dig into the documents tab, and that will take you to the TRPA site, which is where all the sort of stakeholder forum materials and the public workshop recording are housed. And so you can get all the history there. And so between those 2 sites, there's a wealth of information on this project. And so with the remainder of our time tonight, I'd like to turn it over to Ashley. She wants to speak on one issue, and then we'll go to the next slide on next steps, and we'll hear from Rebecca on what happens with the project next. So with that, Ashley, you care to weigh in?
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it. Kids came back here. I just wanted to take 1 second. He had to make an appearance. He made an appearance on last one. So I just wanted to take 1 second here really quickly and address some of the emergency access discussions and questions that came up. I just wanted to say that really the approach that we took for this project is that we looked at the restoration activities and we said, how are these impacting the recreation? And we thought of things that we could do to mitigate that. And a pier was an example of a mitigation that we came up with. And then in thinking about, okay, now that we're thinking about this pier, we're thinking about both a motorized pier and a non-motorized pier. Are there opportunities then to provide and partner with some of our local agencies and to provide this emergency access? And that's where the conversations came around about would we be able to add things to the pier to provide that access? And we did actually think about some other pier configurations, for example, and decided not to go with such a with some of the more impactful options that we could have. So that's really the approach we took with that emergency vehicle access. We didn't sort of say, Meeks Bay wants a boat, how can we do it? So just wanted to make sure that was out there for everyone's consideration.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying, Ashley, and good to see you, little one. So let's turn to Rebecca and walk us through our next steps.
Sure. So we only have about 3 minutes, so I'll try to be brief here. So coming up at the end of January, we're going to have a public hearing at the TRPA Governing Board Regional Plan Implementation Committee. And at that hearing, you'll all have a chance to speak up, speak your mind, and also, let the governing board know what your concerns are and what you're interested in. And that will give them a chance also to hear an update on the project and take a look at the alternatives as well. And then, simultaneously, we're working on a preliminary effects analysis, and this is really one of the initial steps of the environmental analysis. So since working on that, and then we'll have that available prior to drafting the full EIR. And that's really looking at what do we anticipate to be some of the environmental impacts of this project. And based on that effects analysis, as well as everything we've heard today and all that public input so far, the agencies will need to select a preferred alternative prior to beginning that environmental analysis. And now, as Adam mentioned, this preferred alternative might not look the same at the end of the process. It might be that the agency ultimately selects kind of a mix and match of different elements of the alternatives, but we do need to kind of be transparent about what the agency preference is for one of the alternatives. And then we'll be taking that preferred alternative rationale and presentation, as well as the preliminary effects, to the stakeholder forum in the spring of 2021, so probably around March. So stay tuned for announcements on that. We'll have it posted on the website. And then we'll be moving into the preparation of the EIS-EIR this summer, and we'll have the draft out, we think, out in fall. So we'll be putting announcements about that. And then the project approval is anticipated for next spring, so about a year from now. So if you keep on following the Meeks Bay project website, we will have all of this information on there and all these documents posted as we complete them. And then also any dates that come up once we get those finalized for the stakeholder forum.
Okay. Well, excellent. Thank you, Rebecca. And we're right at 7:30, which was our scheduled end time for this meeting. So I do apologize that we lost our 10-minute sort of Q&A at the end here, but I do want to respect everyone. It's getting late into the evening. And we do have all your questions. And as Rebecca pointed out, the team will be working to consolidate all the comments that came in tonight and work through the chat dialogue. And we will make sure to update the FAQ and send a notice out to the project mailing list. So if you are not receiving emails about this project or the announcement of this public workshop, please go ahead and drop your email in the chat box and we'll add you to the project mailing list. And so we'll go forward from there, and really appreciate everyone coming out tonight to learn about this project and to provide constructive input. And thanks for working through this sort of challenging medium. It's not the same as standing around a flip chart and looking at some diagrams and being able to mark it up. So we miss that, but we look forward to coming back to that kind of interaction, and appreciate you being really constructive in this time together. So with that, we'll close out the meeting, and wish you all a safe evening, and thanks a lot. And I'll stay on for a minute here to allow folks to drop their emails into the chat box, and give you a second on that end. So with that, if everyone else wants to cut out, have a good evening, and we'll talk soon.